Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Welcome to this afternoon's webinar on giving to Turkey and Syria. I'm delighted to introduce our host, the Group Chief Executive of the Charities Aid Foundation, Neil Heslop.
Derek, thank you very much, and good afternoon to everyone, and thank you so much for taking the time to be with us this afternoon. As Derek said, I'm Chief Exec of Charities Aid Foundation. For those of you who may not be familiar with us as an organization, we're a 99-year-old foundation based in the UK, but also with activities and foundations in the United States and Canada. As an organization, our purpose is to accelerate progress in society towards a fair and sustainable future for all. And the way that we do that is in three ways. We partner with donors to enable them to deliver the greatest impact from their giving. We also support charities to do more of their life-changing work with lasting benefits for all of us. And from an advocacy point of view, we come together to collaborate across sectors and borders to try and inspire the kind of innovation so that civil society as a whole can thrive. And it is against that backdrop that we want to share with you some of the work that's been going on within our organization and our network of partners in response to the devastating effect of the earthquake in Turkey and Syria. My job this morning is to introduce to you our partners from different parts of the world. In doing so, I would leave you with three thoughts. Firstly, any response to such an extraordinary event as took place in February is a marathon and not a sprint. In thinking about how we as a society respond, we have to think global, but most importantly, we have to act local. And therefore, in bringing together successful interventions and support, what is utterly critical is partnership and collaboration across the whole ecosystem. And that's why I'm especially pleased that we have the opportunity to learn from the insights from our partners in different respects. So I'm going to be joined this morning by Cherniavsky, who's the Chief Executive of UK for UNHCR, together with her colleague, Oliver Smith, on the ground in Turkey. I'm also thrilled that Rana, who is the Director General of CAF's international partner in Turkey, a member of our network, TUSEV, which is the third sector foundation of Turkey, along with their partners on the ground with extraordinary insights to share from Rana and Yörük, and we're going to hear from them. Finally, two of my colleagues, Jessie Krafft from our team in CAF America, and Derek Ray Hill, who based here in the UK, works with us on extending CAF's international work around the world. And collectively, what we wish to do is to provide an opportunity to draw all of those insights together, some of the learnings from the immediate response back in February, get a sense of where things are on the ground now, 6-7 months on, and then get a real sense of what the challenges and opportunities are for all of us interested in contributing to a sustained and effective response to the earthquakes and their consequences. So that's what we're about doing today. And our first request is to ask for your help. We're going to run a quick doodle survey and ask you to give us a sense, if you are a donor, as to whether you have donated once or whether you have donated on a consistent basis as part of a long-term sustainable approach. And I think we're going to put up that survey now, and based on that will help inform some of the discussion that we're about to have. I'm hoping that you're able to, that those of whom for whom
fantastic. We have some interim results. Anyone else is welcome to put some thoughts in the chat. You made a one-off donation in the immediate aftermath, 80%. You have donated multiple times over the past months, 20%. You have a long-term support strategy in place, 0%. So those are some very interesting results. Thank you all very much for participating, and please do put any comments and questions in the chat. Now I'm delighted to introduce our next speaker, the Chief Executive of UK for UNHCR, Emma Cherniavsky.
Thank you, Derek, and thank you very much, Neil, and to the Charities Aid Foundation for your partnership and for the very generous support that we have received from so many of your clients around the world. We are the national charity partner for UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency here in the UK, and we work to mobilize support for UNHCR's work in Turkey and Syria and in dozens of other countries around the world. Just in the past year, UNHCR has responded to some 35 emergencies, and so typically our work focuses on supporting those who are forced to flee from war and persecution. And that's in emergency contexts like this one, but also supporting longer-term refugee populations that are living in countries like Pakistan, Uganda, and Colombia, just to name a few examples. The earthquakes in Syria and Turkey impacted an estimated 24 million people and claimed more than 57,000 lives. They hit an area where there was already a very large population of displaced people, primarily Syrian refugees, and a very high level of humanitarian need. Turkey is one of the largest host countries for refugees around the world. They host about 4 million refugees, again, primarily Syrian refugees, and about 1.7 million of these refugees were affected by the earthquakes. So later on in the webinar, my colleague Oliver is going to tell you a little bit more about exactly what's been happening on the ground in Northwest Syria. In the aftermath of the earthquakes, UNHCR launched a global appeal to raise funding from both governments and private donors, which is how UNHCR is funded. And currently that appeal is about 2/3 funded. And we're really seeking to try to close that gap before the arrival of the colder months and the winter, which is always a very difficult time for refugees. And I'm pleased to say that here in the UK, we've managed to raise about nearly £6 million from UK for UNHCR's generous supporters towards that appeal. UNHCR's response has been focused on providing humanitarian relief and emergency life-saving items such as tents and blankets, kitchen sets. We've provided cash assistance to refugee families to be able to meet their immediate needs and also support the local economy. We have set up a counseling line where refugees can obtain information and alerts about what is happening and where they can access support, and finding other family members as well who may have been displaced by the disaster. And finally, on an ongoing basis, we are providing protection monitoring, and that helps us to identify families that need additional support, for example, psychological support or additional legal assistance. So 6 months on from the earthquake, many people remain displaced and in need of support. And one of the primary areas that we're working in is shelter. We are trying to transition families from living in tents to living in prefabricated housing units, while at the same time looking to rebuild more permanent long-term housing, which of course is something that happens over the course of months, and it takes quite a long time to rebuild after an earthquake of this magnitude. I think it's important to recognize that the Syrian crisis remains one of the largest and longest running displacement crises in the world. And we're witnessing a significant increase in poverty levels among refugees in that population in particular, and some very challenging economic conditions in the countries that host Syrian refugees. And that's countries like Turkey and Lebanon and Jordan. Our response as UNHCR has been focused on addressing immediate needs and also supporting durable solutions, so looking to the long term as well. So for example, enrolling Syrian refugee children in both primary and secondary education and providing an opportunity for them to apply for university scholarships through our funded DAFI scholarship program. Supporting refugee families to become self-reliant, and improving their access to services and legal work opportunities and livelihoods. And finally, also, and very importantly, supporting integration into host communities in Turkey, and where it's possible. But again, this is unfortunately only a possible route for some families. Access to resettlement and a safe and voluntary return to Syria. But that is an option at this time for quite a small number of families. I want to say that none of this response to the earthquake and to UNHCR's continuing work for refugees on the ground in Syria and Turkey and in other countries around the world, none of it would be possible without the generosity and the compassion of private funders. I think a final point before I hand over to my fellow speakers. I think as the news cycle moves on, it's harder to keep attention on the emergency response. And I think we need to continue to make every effort that we can to help the affected refugees in Turkey and Syria rebuild their lives and their homes. And at the same time, the number of refugee emergencies around the world is increasing year after year. And in response to that, UNHCR has created a new emergency fund, which we are launching here in the UK as well, which will help UNHCR be there more consistently, more quickly, and to really enable us to respond in real time to the needs of these growing emergencies in places like Sudan, for example, which is the newest sort of unexpected but very, very substantial and difficult emergency. Yesterday, we passed the grim milestone that some 5 million Sudanese have been displaced by the ongoing conflict there, both internally and over the borders. So finally, I just want to thank you for joining us today for this conversation and showing your support for refugees. And thank you very much, Neil, and your colleagues for shining a spotlight on the situation in Turkey and Syria and what we can do to support refugee families there in the months and the years ahead.
Thank you. I'm delighted to introduce our next speaker, as Neil said, from our partner within the CAF International Network, TUSEV in Turkey, the General Secretary, Rana Kotan.
Thank you, Derek. Let me start by giving the audience some brief information about TUSEV. We are an infrastructure support organization with a strong member network of leading foundations and associations in Turkey. We work to achieve a more enabling environment for civil society, and our work mainly involves monitoring and reporting developments in civic space, sharing our recommendations with the wider community, and advocating for legal reform. Our main role in the aftermath of the earthquakes has been to watch the field, to make recommendations, and create platforms for sharing. We published 2 observationals in Turkish and English to summarize the needs, to mobilize the donors, and also to convey the message to authorities that the legislation concerning civil society has to be more supportive to allow for better disaster response. Since the earthquake, we brought together our members as well as grant makers to share their experiences with each other. We informed the international community regarding the earthquakes. We tried to make sure that the earthquake remains on their agenda for the longer term, since recovery will last for at least a decade. During this process, we also partnered with new organizations, such as the Center for Disaster Philanthropy, with whom we hosted a webinar for grant-making organizations in Turkey. We have been a dedicated partner of CAF for the past 4 years. I'm grateful that CAF UK and CAF America have taken this issue very, very seriously and provided all the support we needed, including this webinar. We are also collaborating with the Bulgarian partner of CAF, which is called BCOS, since they are also actively supporting recovery efforts in Turkey. Yesterday marked the 7th month of the earthquake. During this time, some basic needs still remained. Some other needs became more complex. It's a severe disaster, and it will take several years, maybe decades, to recover. Therefore, it's absolutely crucial to continue supporting rebuilding efforts in the region. Today, we invited 2 Turkish colleagues from civil society who have been working on the field and supporting civil society organizations since day one. I'm sure their expertise will be very valuable for all of us to better understand the current situation and the needs on the field. I would like to introduce my colleague Ayşegül Yalçın Eriş. She is the Deputy General Coordinator of the Association for Solidarity with Asylum Seekers and Migrants. And I'd like to also introduce Yörük Kurtaran. He is one of the founders of Support Foundation for Civil Society. In a minute, they will deep dive into the dynamics and needs during the moderated session. Thanks again for joining this webinar. We appreciate your interest and your willingness to support. You can always reach us whenever you need anything. Back to you, Derek.
Thank you so much, Rana. And thank you, everyone, for your ongoing participation. I'm delighted to introduce my colleague from our affiliate, CAF America, the Senior Vice President of External Affairs, Jessie Krafft.
Hello, good morning, everyone. Good afternoon. So I just want to talk a little bit about, so firstly, CAF America had a quick response in Turkey, and we're actually still in both Turkey and Syria, and we're still making grants into Turkey as of today, which is excellent because it gives some long-term support to disaster relief there, which is absolutely necessary. So total so far, we've given about $2.2 million and 113 grants. But overall, CAF Group's response to disasters differs country to country, as you can imagine, from different local contexts. And I'll talk about specifically the distinctions in Syria and the challenges that we and other funders have there in getting funds across those borders. But our response generally even differs amongst the CAF Group entities the entities that make up CAF Group, so CAF America and CAF UK and CAF Canada. CAF UK primarily works with organizations in the UK and specifically Disasters Emergency Committee to facilitate a lot of their disaster response. And then CAF America takes a localized approach, giving directly to organizations locally in country. And of course, there are legal distinctions in the UK and in the US that facilitate that. But our CAF America's basic approach to disaster and our response in Turkey and Syria is we facilitate and manage a large network of organizations globally that support disaster relief. And we pre-validate and pre-vet these organizations and maintain this network so that we're ready to respond quickly. And there's some other bullet points here that describe how we manage that, but we have information readily available to donors about which organizations locally are responding, and we can support them in the selection of those organizations. So just in the interest of time, I'll move on to my second slide on Syria specifically, just to talk a little bit about some of the challenges and really highlight some of the country by country shifts that we have to make when we're dealing with disasters or crises in different local regions. And specifically in high risk areas like Syria, sanctions compliance really comes into play. And then further to that, the ability and appetite for donor response. So, for example, within Syria, we were thankful that the Department of Treasury Office of Foreign Assets Control, or OFAC, they released a general license for earthquake relief efforts in Syria shortly after the earthquake, which allows for humanitarian support and gives a lot more flexibility, which is amazing. That actually recently expired, but there is still a general license for humanitarian assistance in Syria. And OFAC actually released a really helpful guide that we can now use to follow to support Syria. However, there are other challenges that we face, even with general licenses and guidance from OFAC, such as, for example, we have to work with banks to facilitate transfers into the country, and many of these banks don't allow transfers even with the general license, just because they're not willing to take on the risk. So we do have a white paper on our website that talks a little bit about navigating those sanctions overall, but also in these challenging and risk areas, particularly during disaster. So there's a link here, but that can be shared separately as well. And then another recent change that's creating some challenges in Syria is that the UN Security Council failed to adopt reauthorize this 9-year resolution for cross-border aid into Syria. So we're still seeing the fallout from that and looking at next steps, but that's just a much more recent update that we are seeing and tracking in terms of our ability to give cross-border into countries like Syria. So I will stop there and pass it back to Neil, who I believe will introduce our next speaker.
That's great, Jessie. That's really, really helpful. And I guess I would just emphasize one of the key objectives for today, in response to that poll that we did right at the beginning, where 80% of donors have acted once and 20% more than once. What we're trying to do is to find creative ways across all of our partnership networks to rebalance that point about this is a marathon, not a sprint, and we all need to be in it for the long haul. And that point about, yes, thinking global, but most importantly, acting local. So I really want now to turn the conversation over to those of our colleagues who are really sharing their insights from the front line. And in the first instance, I'd like to go to Oliver Smith from UNHCR. And I guess, as in your remarks, Oliver, I'd really like to pose just a couple of questions. Firstly, I'm incredibly conscious that in Syria, as Emma said, before the earthquake hit, this was against a backdrop of a 13-year-long conflict with some extraordinary implications. So getting a sense from you as to how UNHCR responded in that context, in the immediate aftermath of the crisis, would be incredibly insightful and valuable for people. And then I think, secondly, where do you think we're up to now? And give us a sense of what you think is required going forward. So over to you, Oliver.
Me well and see me well. And I hope to, with this snapshot, with what I'm able to explain and with some pictures, to also give all the participants on this call, whom I really thank for your interest and support, particularly for the people of Syria, that what we had, as you explained, the earthquake was a natural disaster on top of a 13-year humanitarian crisis, just compounding the tremendous difficulties that the people are already facing in northwest Syria. Just a little bit of context. I am based in Turkey. However, we do the cross-border operation for northwest Syria, which is still a part of Syria, which is held by the opposition. And so because we can't deliver assistance across the front lines from Damascus, we have to be based in Turkey and deliver assistance from Turkey. And so right now in northwest Syria, you have 4.5 million people, with over 4 million who are in need of humanitarian assistance. 2.9 million of those individuals have been displaced from other parts within Syria and have found refuge in the northwest. 2 million people are living in camps, often makeshift camps with very limited support. Most of them are women and children, and 800,000 are still living in tents. So on the February 6th, when the earthquake struck southeast Turkey and the northwest of Syria, in northwest Syria, 6,000 people lost their lives. It's estimated that 53,000 families have lost their homes. And so in that, as you could see in some of the initial pics, and sorry, they might be going a little bit fast, I made the timing a little bit quick, but I think the control can go back to some of the photos as we go along in the discussion. So we saw, enormous devastation. Tens of thousands of buildings were completely destroyed, particularly in certain districts. What we were able to do immediately, now this impacted us right in Gaziantep, Turkey, where we sat. We lost staff members. The roads going across the border were destroyed, and so it were days in which we couldn't provide immediate response. But luckily, we had pre-positioned items, and we were able to distribute tents and basic items such as mattresses, blankets, kitchen sets, hygiene kits immediately into the community. But 4 days later, we're able to start sending trucks as well across the border. So we were sending not only in addition to tents and basic need items, but we were sending prefabricated housing units. There are some pictures here that highlight those, which are actually with the help of IKEA made and to be able to to put up quickly and to be able to give shelter, something needed immediately right after the earthquake. And in addition, we were able to start our protection services right away as well. This was a lot of psychosocial support that we're able to provide to communities suffering from trauma. We were able to continue recreation activities for children. And then we saw the long-term needs as well. Because what happened after the earthquake, that after 8 years of not being able to cross the border, UN agencies were finally allowed to cross the border. And you'll see in some of these pictures how we were able to be there right on the ground. And so we could see some of the longer term needs or medium to longer term needs, such as the loss of civil documentation. Without family cards, without marriage certificates, birth certificates, being able to register events of your life, frequently you're not able to access assistance in Northwest Syria. And so we're immediately started to shift some of our programming into additional legal awareness and counseling, into helping people get their documentation so that it would be able to access assistance, and to upscale our support for psychosocial support and counseling services as well. And so that as UNHCR is what we're trying to do now, not only in the immediate aftermath, but looking at the months and years going forward. In addition, we also identified the need to provide more what we call dignified shelter. This is going beyond the temporary shelter that tents provide and prefabricated housing units, to creating sandwich panel shelters. And there are some pictures of that here as well, which are installed to water facilities. You have a kitchen facility, and you have a latrine as well that are right there beside the house. And so with that, we're able to provide more durable, longer-term shelter for people who have been displaced, so that protects them from the elements as well. One example, though, of one family we're able to assist was the family of Shamsa. There is a picture here in the immediate aftermath. Now, Shamsa really and her family really epitomize the long-term struggle that families have been facing. She and her family were displaced from their home in Aleppo in 2020. They moved to Jandaris, which was to Jandaris in northwest Syria, and started renting a house, were able to send their kids to school. But Jandaris was severely impacted by the earthquake, devastating numbers of buildings. So they lost their home and all that was inside of it. They were immediately displaced to simply a mud brick shelter with covering of some plastic sheeting. We were able immediately to provide a family tent, which you can see here in the background. And so at least in the immediate aftermath, to provide some additional safety and security through a family tent that was provided. And hopefully in the longer term, we were able to transition into either a prefabricated housing unit or to a dignified shelter. Their biggest concern that they still have, of course, that she told us, was the education for her children, which is a primary need. Still within a certain tragedy, we still find resilience to move on. And so looking forward now, after 12 years of displacement and repeated shocks, which continue to have a heat wave, which we had this year, we'll have a strong winter coming up, fires and floods. We want to build greater resilience, in addition through rolling out an additional cash program, continuing a shelter program, and our protection services. So I hope that this was to be able to answer some of your questions, Neil, to provide a bit of a picture of what's happening in Northwest Syria and how UNHCR is able to support.
Oliver, that was tremendous, really, really helpful. Thank you. I'm sure people have found some of those insights very moving, actually. Thank you so much. Perhaps we can now turn to our colleagues from Turkey and try and get a sense of what's happening on the ground today in Turkey and how you see the coming challenges and how all of the partners in this wider network and our donor base can support some of that activity for what needs to come next. I think okay.
Yeah, I could. First of all, thank you for the organization and the invitation. And the subject and the questions are that I'm going to speak in is very difficult to summarize, but I'll do my best. And so I'm just jumping. I would like to move on immediately without losing time to the issue. My name is Ayşegül Yalçın Eriş, and I work as a Deputy General Coordinator of Asylum, Association for Solidarity with Asylum Seekers and Migrants. My organization founded in the year 1995, just after the Gulf War, for the people who are seeking asylum. And now we do work all over Turkey with 53 offices and around 3,000 full-time staff. I believe that information is important to understand what are we doing in the region. So right after the earthquakes, Asylum engaged in search and rescue and humanitarian aid efforts in the earthquake-affected provinces with over 800 personnel who reached the region from across Turkey. And Asylum canine search and rescue team rescued 30 people from under the rubble through works initiated for days. And the evacuations, for example, evacuations of over 800 children under institutional care in the earthquake provinces to safe zones was ensured within the first 3 days of the disaster in coordination with the Ministry of Family and Social Services. And interpretation support was provided in Arabic, English, Spanish, French, and Ukrainian to the search and rescue teams that came from abroad during the first days of the earthquake. And Asylum established its compounds in the region in order to conduct its activities swiftly and efficiently in the regions affected by the earthquake. I just wanted to share some pictures of our components. I think the next slides is going to be about our components to give some real imaginations how they look like. Having collected the relief items dispatched to the region in these compounds, Asylum met the shelter needs of staff in the region and the people who are in need, and ensured coordination in the field from these points, let's say. And as Asylum, we do work in all sectors such as humanitarian assistance, protection, health, education, mental health, case-based assistance, MHPSS, support, social cohesion, and all related fields for the earthquake. And the number of personnel working in the earthquake zone was over 1,500. And the number of the beneficiaries reached by need assessment is over 100,000. And moreover, the number of beneficiaries affected by EQ is almost 400,000 since the very first day of the EQ through needs assessments and the humanitarian relief efforts, and over 1 million relief items were distributed to those in need. I need to share these informations before answering your questions to, give what are we doing and how we can get these points about challenges and about needs for this. So, and also I think some of the general information might be helpful as well. As my colleagues informed you, before me, earlier than me, but I'm not going to share with the well-known general informations. I will only underline some of the important points of the figures. Almost 16 million people have been affected by the earthquake, and nearly 2 million of them are Syrians and foreigners from other nationalities who lives in Turkey, but 2 million population is almost half of the refugee population who lives in Turkey, that they live in the region earthquake affected. Half of the population of the people. And 5 million of the people who are affected are children, and half are women. And there are approximately 2.5 million people with disabilities living in the region before the earthquake. This is also a very important point to go on. And unfortunately, 50,000 people lost their lives, and Ministry Interior announced the number of migrants who lost their lives in the earthquake-affected area was 7,300. So it is also a very big number for the Syrian population as well. Since we have very limited time, I'll come to the point of challenges that we observed during our operations. Lack of medium and long-term comprehensive integrated financial mechanism and plans for reconstructions in the provinces, districts after the earthquake is one of the important one. Likewise, how long will it take for water and sewage infrastructure damage in the earthquake zones to become fully active again? We don't know yet. And it is other important challenge that I would like to underline is high number of the children who have lost at least one of their caregivers and are in need of social support mechanism, and high number of women and men who have now become single parents. And also we need strategy for fighting against gender-based violence and negative coping mechanisms such as early and forced marriages, remaining out of school, child labor, children assuming the responsibilities of providing home care and parentification. And I think one of the most important part of today's meeting is sharing our observation on urgent relief items, but clean water is very important part. Family hygiene kits, equipment devices for persons with disabilities are very urgent and important. And also there are some services in need for the EQ region. PSS support service, elimination of security risk for women and girls, health services, but I think one of the most important need in the field is gender-based approach. So all donors have responsibility to check and push their implementing partner for gender-based approach in the field. I just wanted to underline that important point. And also I would like to underline a very important point in here is preventing social tension and conflict through community engagement and community-based protection approached between Turkish citizens and asylum seekers, since it is a very important key element for planning, for the coordination, for community engagement, for reporting, for everything, for the next aid planning. So also I think it is very important to say that we must go mainstreaming for the protection intervention to use the source in its best way. So protecting the most vulnerable people such as children, unaccompanied children, women, adolescents, girls, persons with disabilities, pregnant women, people with chronic illness, single parents, elderly, and enabling their access to social protection mechanism is immediately is also important. I don't know how many minutes I have left, so I'm just putting in here.
Perhaps, if there are any final points that you'd like to make, I mean, that's fascinating and incredibly helpful. Thank you so much. Maybe any final thoughts, and then we'll pass on to Yörük.
Okay. Before Yörük, maybe we need to give a special place to prevent negative coping mechanism. I just mentioned, you know, such as child, early and forced marriage, and school dropouts through PSS and protection interventions is also, I mean, is very important for the future, for the next planning for the donors. So I just wanted to underline that challenges and needs, and thank you.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much. Yörük.
Hello. This is Yörük. I'm one of the founders of Support Foundation for Civil Society. We are a small grant-making organization operating from Istanbul since 2016. We are a little bit unique because we mobilize local and international funding opportunities, and we pool resources together to support organizations on the ground with grants. And we also provide some organizational development opportunities for organizations. Between 2016 and till the earthquake, we provided around 1.8 million euros with the support of more than 3,000 donors. That also includes corporations, international institutions, and I'm proud to say not without any government funding. Most of our grants go to core funding, which means unlike a lot of grant-making organizations, around half of our budget goes to core support to smaller organizations. When I say smaller, more or less, nearly more than 70% of the organizations that we support have a budget of less than 150,000 euros. So this is more or less a glimpse of our foundation. I would like to talk about the needs on the ground, but before that, I think it's very important really to talk about and understand the context. And here, I think the context is Turkey, because this terrible disaster has happened in Turkey. So whatever is happening on the ground, it is within this context that everything should be done. Just to give you some figures. In the Economist, the magazine Economist's Democracy Index, Turkey ranks 103rd. In the World Press Freedom Index of Reporters Without Borders, Turkey ranks 165th. In the Transparency International's Index of the Corruption Index, Turkey ranks 101st. In the Freedom House's Freedom in the World Index, Turkey ranks as a not free country. And in the Global Gender Gap Report of World Economic Forum, Turkey ranks 129th. And as some of you may already know, Turkey is in a economic and currency crisis. So when people say, or think about an economic crisis, what kind of an economic crisis? I'll just give you one figure. 5 years ago today, before the meeting, I've just checked it. 5 years ago today, $1 was equal to 6.15 Turkish liras. As of today, $1 is equal to 26.8 Turkish liras. So when we're talking about an economic crisis, this is what we are talking about. In that sense, of course, within this context, once the earthquake happened, and since then, we have been trying to mobilize certain resources to support, especially civil society organizations on the ground. What we did was, we mobilized more than 3 million euros of grants to more than 70 organizations. Some of them were emergency grants, but a greater amount of them were about long-term support to these organizations, and specifically to smaller and grassroots organizations. Most of them were granted based on open calls. So in the last more than 4 months, or 3 or 4 months, I read more than 900 applications to grant these 70 grants. And till the February of 2024, we pledged to mainstream earthquake in all of our thematic grant fundings. And still in our pocket, we have around 1 million euros to distribute, which hopefully we will be supporting long-term grassroots projects of the organizations. This is important because within that context of Turkey, of course, the civil society is viable, strong, responsive, and agile. So what I want to say is, as long as the space is provided, civil society delivers in Turkey. Yes, of course, the civil society space is shrinking globally and in Turkey also. Yet, civil society is capable of doing a lot of things. From our limited experience with 900 applications, what I can say is that organizations on the ground needs core support to sustain their work. So yes, the paradigm and the whole discourse is based on the needs of the people, but as long as we don't forget the needs of the civil society organizations, whatever is happening on the ground with all these valuable organizations will be organically involved there and will their effect in the long term. Again, what we have seen is that as the civil society space is shrinking, funding is needed for coalitions, like on the ground, to monitor what's happening on the ground by government money, by international funding, by NGO money. I think we need coalitions to monitor what's going on. Of course, in Turkey, a lot of communities and fields are connected within themselves, but they are not connected among each other. So we think we saw the need of a cross-sectoral cooperation among these fields and among these different kinds of NGOs. And of course, we need to invest in the people and the organizations themselves. When I say organizations, civil society organizations, independent civil society organizations, because in this way, they can complement each other's work and the work of municipalities and the government also. Maybe last but not least, I think we also need to provide funding for cooperation and co-creation opportunities. Because yes, a lot of organizations are doing wonderful stuff on the ground, yet as long as the civil society brings whatever they want to bring together, it is very important to organize these spaces. And of course, we are also concentrating on the region, in the region, yet there is a larger, not a larger maybe, but there is a great amount of population in the hosting cities where there are a lot of people who have migrated from these earthquake regions to other bigger cities, metropolitan cities. So in that sense, in our eyes, it's very important to support any activity, civil society activity in these hosting cities also. For now, this is I want to say thank you.
Yörük, that was absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much. I'm conscious we've got 7 or 8 minutes left, and we wanted to provide an opportunity for some questions from the audience. And I think if people can pose any questions, my colleague Derek is going to try and field them so we can then direct them. Just while he's doing that, I just kind of like to make an observation. I'm conscious that our participation on this event will be drawn from stakeholders from very, very many different points of view. To those CAF America donors that Jessie talked about, responsible for that $2.5 million and 100 or so grants, our huge appreciation and thanks to all of you. Here in the UK, as Jessie mentioned, we work a lot with the Disasters Emergency Committee, and for the 7,000 donations and the more than £4 million directed through that route. Huge thank you to all of those donors and to those who are in a position to consider to give again. and to think about maintaining this cause as a key priority in the long haul of the coming months. We would really invite you to think very, very deeply and seriously about that. Thank you to all of the participants. We've had a real mix from different organizations. But Derek, do we have any questions that we want to try and field?
We have several, but I think as you hinted, Neil, we don't have much time. So if you don't mind, I'm going to pick out the one that plays back to the poll we did at the beginning, which is when no one said they had a long-term strategy in place. And the question is, why is it so important that donors think long-term and strategically about their giving when it comes to disasters?
And who do you want to direct that question to, or is that a question to the room?
I was going to leave that decision for you, Neil. I was thinking a combination of our later panelists would be good.
Yörük, your thoughts? Let's work backwards.
It's a very easy one on my side, because as we have seen in the past disasters, nobody will remember what has happened after a year. So in that sense, I think we need to mobilize, or people needs to give based on sustainable terms, so that civil society activity, when nobody remembers, civil society activity still prevails there after 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. Otherwise, it's not a good end. That's what experience tells us.
Oliver, any additional thoughts to that question?
It was said eloquently by Yörük, but I think that the multi-year strategy is what we also plan on. We are not just thinking about the needs today, and we're talking about a protracted situation in northwest Syria, still an active conflict going on. The needs after the earthquake are certainly not even met now, 6-7 months down the road, and the needs will continue for the foreseeable future. So we have to keep the people of Syria and northwest Syria foremost in our minds as we continue to deal with this crisis.
And I guess invite others to any concluding remarks from Emma, Rana, or
I think Ayşegül has just gone off mute, Neil.
Ayşegül, please jump in.
Thank you. Actually, I wouldn't be more agreed like with my dear colleague Yörük. Yes, we cannot be well prepared because we are not living in the, we are living in the country, let's say. We cannot see our future, near future, but also, of course, we have plans, future plans. We have a strategic plans for the next 10 years, 5 years, but we're not sure because we are receiving foundation from the donors just for a year. And for the next for the other years, we need to be in collaboration with the donors to plan for and to plan and to be sure it is going to be parallel with our strategic focus for the next year. So maybe next time in other hour I can give more detail about the next future planning. What should we do? But in fact we have to be in good contact with the donors to plan the next future, the middle next, and the far future. We have to be in good contact always to be sure that we are going to receive foundation for the next for the second year or for the third year after implementation this project.
Could I add something as well?
Oh, yeah, I was just going to say Emma wanted to add something, so thank you, Emma.
Well, just to say that this is sort of based on UNHCR's work in many emergency contexts, that the more, so many refugee situations such as the Syrian war are now lasting much longer than was originally anticipated, and has led to kind of long-term displacement. And in that context, investment in the resilience of these communities, and that investment can take the form of donations, but also partnerships with the private sector and companies that may, for example, be in a position to employ refugees, and to contribute to the sort of resilience and the ability of refugees to become more self-reliant, and also to invest in the host communities in countries like Turkey, so that the economic conditions are more favorable, and there is the space really, and the ability for countries like Turkey to really be able to have integration with their refugee population, and to build the ability of refugee populations through education, through livelihoods training, and that's very much what is at the heart of UNHCR's work. So both the short-term response, but also that long-term investment in education, in livelihoods, and in the ability of refugee populations to be more resilient when that next, unexpected disaster might strike.
That's a great summary. Thank you, Emma. My thanks to all of the donors who've joined our conversation. We hope you found, as we have found, the insight shared by Yörük and Ayşegül and Rana and Oliver and Emma and Jessie and Derek helpful. I think I would just simply close the event by going back to what I said right at the beginning, and that is, I think the recurrent theme through all of this, while the response has been what it has been up until now, it's a marathon and not a sprint. And I know we all know that. It's a statement of the blindingly obvious, but hopefully today is a helpful reminder, and seeing through the lens of organizations of very, very different types, whether that be Charities Aid Foundation, UNHCR, whether that be TUSEV, whether that be our colleagues on the ground from Turkey, regardless of the organization and the perspective, that truth is self-evidently coming through loud and clear. And our challenge for all of us is how do we think global, but most importantly act local? And we can and only do that through partnership, through conversation, through collaboration. And we hope that everyone has found this hour together helpful and useful in shining a spotlight on what has happened, what is happening, and what needs to happen in the future. So on behalf of all of my colleagues from all of the organizations, thank you so much for spending time with us, and we hope you found this short time together useful. Thank you.